Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are back in War Thunder, and Gaijin have posted some news about naval forces. The post is called About the Development of Naval Forces in War Thunder. If you'd like to see it, there will be a link in the description, and it's also on their official website if you don't want to go to the link. So we're going to go through this. I have talked about in the past few weeks about Fly Daily's video and many others' videos criticizing not having large ships in the game and basically focusing more on smaller ships. And even though I completely agree with them, it would be nice to see larger ships, I do have some queries about those ships. So there will be a link also in the description for that video where I outline my issues that have to be at least looked at by Gaijin. So these are them in short summary if you don't want to watch the video. Balancing ships between tanks and aircraft. So these massive ships will have a ton of anti-aircraft guns, and also ships' batteries could flatten ground forces maps. I go into more detail in the video, but as you can see, that is a big problem. How would ships fit in something like World War mode? What objectives would they move towards? How would they win a battle in combined arms? Obviously, unless you're fighting in the sea, the Navy is only so useful when you have to take land on the ground. So, once again, I go more in depth in the video. AI-controlled ships and their damage. This is in reference to the tank AI in ground forces battles right now, which can actually kill you now. Before they used to plink and plonk at you. Now, since they've made the AI be at your tier, or the tier of the battle, they can kill you with unrelenting force. So I'm wondering if ships, AI ships, are going to have the same issues. And also the RNG factor. There are many RNG factors to look at, but the one I mainly focus on is team composition. If you have more massive ships on one side than the other, the side with the more massive ships is going to have a larger advantage. Maybe not. Maybe there may be an advantage in having smaller ships, such as destroyers, but still there is going to be an advantage somewhere, and it needs to be addressed, very much like how they limited the amount of bombers that you could have in realistic battles. So yeah, these are the things I'd like to see addressed. Maybe they get addressed in this blog post, I don't know, I've only read it through once. Maybe there's a bit more nuance going through. Just about these posts in general, I actually really like them from Gaijin. Not just because they give us some more information, but also the way they lay it out. Generally, the paragraphs are kind of points in themselves, so they don't follow on to the next paragraph. So it's very easy to break it down compared to other gaming companies, or developers I should say, or PR managers, which make these large posts which all try and interlink everything, and I really don't like that because it makes it very hard to analyze and look at. So let's get into it. Greetings, commanders. Today we would like to shed some light on the naval battles development process and to tell you about the problems we have faced and how we have solved them. We would also like to share our plans for the future of naval development. Good stuff, lovely to hear. From the very beginning of War Thunder, naval battles development, we understood that it wouldn't be easy, since our game format is maximum realism on the one hand, and a dynamic game experience with short game sessions on the other. We also took into consideration that implementing different vehicle types in one battle is complicated when we are talking about naval battles. That is why the Mosquito fleet was a logical decision. Battles involving these vessels were both dynamic and interesting. Mosquito fleets, if you don't know what they are, they're basically a collection of very small ships designed to outweigh the enemy and go around the enemy and kind of just destroy them with 1,000 cuts. So the idea of the death of 1,000 cuts. If you're looking for a good example of this, which isn't exactly militarily, but it was used in World War II, the Dunkirk evacuation is a great example of what I would deem a Mosquito fleet. It wasn't just small ships with guns, it was fishermen's boats, it was basically anything the British could get their hands on to get their boys out of there. So that would be a great example of what you would think of as a Mosquito fleet. We saw that in War Thunder when they started bringing out these smaller boats, these PT boats. So the idea would be you'd have a ton of them flying around. It would be very action-packed, it would be very fast-paced, and, well, it was for the first few battles, but as Fly Daily went through in his video, it gets incredibly boring after a while, because basically it's just a ton of smaller ships which are firing very high rate guns, and it's whoever can machine gun the other one to death, which isn't very interesting after you've done it a few times. And obviously with no progression in the game yet, there's nothing to really aim towards. So there's that as well as another factor. So that was their logical decision to go for. Now they did say, before they actually started the pre-beta phase or the closed beta phase, that they were open to the idea of adding in larger ships, basically on feedback and gameplay. And it seems like the thing that is holding them back is this sentence here. The game format is maximum realism on the one hand, and a dynamic game experience with short game sessions on the other. Well, the issue with ships right now, when we look at these smaller ships with a lot of very fast firing, like 20s and 30s, and even slightly larger calibers and even slightly smaller, they generally didn't fight each other. If we look at PT boats and stuff like that, they were very much vessels which were used during the night to try and knock out specific targets, or used in a much more defensive role than, instead of having, as they put it, Mosquito fleets fighting each other. Generally that did not happen in World War II. So you throw the realism out of the window already, but you do at least have those short gaming sessions. One thing about large ships is that it takes a hell of a lot of time, if you want to do it realistically, to take them out. One of the examples of ship combat that I actually really enjoyed was in Empire Total War. Now that is a different time period of ship. We're going back to wood and sails and all of that, and massive arrays of cannons on the ships, but those battles took a very long time to sink large ships, because you had to put so many shots into them and eventually sink them. Now, this would be an issue that you have with larger ships in War Thunder, so it is definitely something that they have to consider, which is probably the main reason why they went for a smaller ship design. Anyway, moving on. The playtests we ran with your participation, helped us a lot to identify the downsides of the gameplay, as well as identifying a variety of bugs and errors, so we had to correct our plans. After analyzing your feedback, we decided to focus on improvement in the gameplay, and temporarily not to introduce new craft in the playtest until we had completed much of the improvements and tweaking. So that is a really good idea. Obviously there's no point in adding, pardon the pun, adding more ships to what is already a sinking ship game mode. The fact that the community already in closed beta is struggling to even be attentive to ships shows that it really has a big issue with its main gameplay, with the fact that it gets boring very quickly. Now, it would have been nice if they actually identified some of the issues or the downsides that they go into, but they don't. They don't go into them. They just say that there were downsides. It would be nice to see what they think the downsides are, and maybe if they outline what the community has also voiced. That would have been a nice thing to clarify. I understand why they don't, because if you clarify what is wrong, then that means you actually have to fix it. And generally, if you don't fix it properly, or if you don't fix it properly in the community's mind, then yeah, you're gonna have issues with stuff like that. Anyway, moving on. As a result of the tests, we decided to implement specific improvements, tweak some mechanics, or even sometimes completely rework the following. So this is some things that they have decided to change. Gun stabilization to compensate for sea motion. We took the decision to model the rocking effects on naval forces, as without them the vessels would become tanks on blue grass. Additionally, in real combat craft, there were various and multiple systems to compensate for any rocking during firing, including three-dimensional compensation. We did our best to model and simulate manual and automatic gun stabilization for War Thunder naval forces in order to make them effective at striking any enemy affected by sea swell and rocking. So this basically means that faster ships are going to be at least useful against these larger ships that we're probably going to see in the future. Without gun stabilization, they would be firing all over the place, and they wouldn't really be able to hit anything, while the large ship just sits there, hopes that a torpedo doesn't come its way, and blasts these smaller ships out the water. So this is basically a balancing mechanic between smaller ships and larger ships, so it's nice to see. It's also, once again, adding to what they said before, the maximum realism on the one hand. This adds to the realism. This existed, very much like, as I talked about with gun stability when it came to the tanks. It is nice to see certain tanks not have that stability and certain tanks having that stability, making it realistic. If they decide to give everything stable guns, then we may have a few issues, because there were definitely vessels out there which didn't have this three-dimensional compensation that they talk about, mainly Russian stuff. So we'll have to see how well that goes. Just as a little tidbit as well, naval forces is not my strong point, so I will come from this much more from a game perspective instead of a historical perspective. So when I talk about realism and stuff, I don't have a massive information to draw from, apart from some books that I've read, and I've over a few months tried to voice myself in these regards. So for the upcoming War Thunder Naval Forces when it's released, and will do as we go along. So we move on to the damage system. We improved the damage system for War Thunder Naval Forces. Even small patrol boats can contain multiple systems. For example, up to 10 to 20 firing points. This variety and complexity makes targeting the exact component on enemy vessel almost impossible due to the small comparative size of these items. This is why we organize components into groups that could be targeted and damaged, and would be visible in the hit camera. Also, we decided to distance our naval forces from the logic we use in the ground forces battles. That is, a craft is counted as destroyed when you have lost your last crew member. In larger and even huge naval crews, there are numerous issues that were pointed out by our players when you had to find and knock out the very last sailor of the enemy vessel. In our new damage model, when you disable one of the enemy compartments, you also disable part of the total crew, specifically the crew assigned to this compartment. So this makes complete sense to me. If you have, let's say, an engine deck, and you, let's say, destroy it, set it on fire, that crew should not be able to move and be able to influence the rest of the crew, just from a gameplay perspective, because basically that just means that you freed up a bunch of crew that then you have to kill, instead of them just being sat in the engine deck not doing anything. So they've basically gone the opposite way, as they say, to ground forces and to aircraft. With aircraft, over the last year or so, we've seen a lot of improvements to the damage model when it comes to components, a lot of much more precision points on aircraft, where if you get shot in a certain area, such as let's say an oil filter or an oil coolant place, I can't remember the exact name for it, then the oil starts spraying, and you can see that if you press O, which is the default, when you're in a battle, and you can see where it's coming from. So it's very precise now. Same with if you take damage to your control systems, damage to your engine, you know which component is hurt, and it's very easy to do from that. Same with tanks. They've done a really good job at showing how precise shots have done the damage to your system. Whereas when you're talking about these massive ships that, you know, people want to add in, it's very hard to do that, and nigh on, well, not impossible, but just ridiculous amounts of work. So it's much better just to make things into much more about compartments, instead of having to have 40, even 200 crew, if we're talking about the biggest ships that they may add. So yeah, that's nice. That's a nice little change. I understand why they've done it, Is it realistic? I mean, you can make the argument that it's realistic. If you have crew in a torpedo bay, and then that torpedo chute is taken out, will the crew move to other systems, or will they try and fix that system? Are they only trained in torpedo use? Are they only trained in firing torpedoes? Maybe they're trained in other areas, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe they have a general engineering background so they can help with repairs, but are they able to fire some of the long guns? Maybe not. So, the argument is there, which is good. It's an argument we can have. Controlling fire from guns of different calibers and purpose. The multiple types of fire units using different calibers complicates reasonable aiming and fire correction. It also forces a player to focus all his fire on a single target. This is why we plan to divide different purpose weaponry to different groups, and a player will be able to choose which ones he will control himself and which ones will be controlled automatically, taking players' commands into account. So this is basically moving to what we have with gunners in aircraft, where you can control the gunners if you want to get that increased accuracy from a player-controlled gunner, but you also have skills that you put into your crew, where it means that you can increase the reliability of the AI gunners being accurate and firing from longer ranges. So it seems like they're doing that for a similar system for ships. It is nice that they actually are going to split it up by caliber. It is an issue I definitely have with certain machines, like if we look at aircraft once again, or even tanks, but not as much with tanks. But with aircraft, let's say you have the Lincoln and you have the Hispano and the 50 firing at the same time. Well, those guns have different velocities, so if you're firing them at the same time, basically what happens is that they'll have different trajectories, especially from where they're from, and also they won't all end up at the same point at the same time. So it would be nice if you'd be able to just control the Hispano gunner and then maybe have a different mode for trying to control the 50 cal gunners. That's, that would be nice, and it seems like that's what they're going for in ships. Does this deal with an issue that I talked about, where where balancing ships between aircraft, where you have lots of anti-aircraft guns on these ships? If they can all be player controlled, then what's going to happen is that once any plane comes near the ship, because it will be quite easy to see these planes unless they come from very high up, and also you should be able to hear them, what's going to happen is they're just going to switch to their AA guns, fire their 20 anti-aircraft guns at the craft, and it's going to die pretty much instantaneously. So from my perspective, what I have always thought would be a good idea for bombers to do is actually just have AI gunners, or if you want to just directly control one gunner, that is completely fine, because technically you're an individual on the bomber. But once you start controlling multiple gunners, then it seems it obviously goes away from what they said before when it comes to the maximum realism idea, because I am not Superman. I am not, I'm not Stretch Man. I cannot stretch my limbs to all 4 guns. I cannot use the tail gunner with my feet, while I use the front the front gunner with my tongue. So, I would like to see something like that, but it seems like it's not the route they're going down, and looking at past things that they've done with bombers, I can see them basically just replicating that in ships, which, I'm completely fine with. But we do need to see how effective these anti-aircraft guns are going to be against aircraft. Will aircraft be able to get even close to these massive ships? New vessel survivability mechanics. Repairs, fire extinguishing, and reducing or stopping flooding. We plan to add more gameplay to these important actions, rather than use the existing fully automatic process. Yeah, that's basically what I thought they would do. When we look at tanks right now, the fact that we have the modification for parts, the modification for FPE, I'm pretty sure they're going to add modifications for ships which will make repairs quicker, or at least have the ability to do repairs, such as parts in tanks. Fire extinguishing, once again FPE like in tanks, so it will probably be a tier 2 modification, maybe tier 1. And reducing or stopping flooding, you could do this with modifications. Maybe, I don't know, one of the modifications is that you add in heavy sealed doors, so therefore you can seal off an area, and you know, that would prevent flooding for the rest of the ship. But maybe that's only a modification you can get, and yeah, so that's probably how they're going to do it. That was their philosophy when it came to ground forces, and that will probably be their philosophy when it comes to ships. Do I agree with it? No, not personally. I would like to see in ground forces FPE and parts given to players, not modifications, but as just as given when you unlock the vehicle. I think there is a massive advantage between having parts and FPE to not having them. And obviously, as I've started peering into Tier 5 in ground vehicles, what has happened is that it takes a hell of a long time to get parts, and then a second modification in Tier 1 before you can even start researching FPE, which is a real big issue when you're coming up against tanks which have the best ammo, FPE parts, and crew replenishment. So yeah, it's definitely something to think about. Smoke screens. Smaller vessels usually do not have serious armor protection. That is why smokescreens play a vital role in increasing a craft's survivability and more diverse gameplay. We already demonstrated the smokescreen mechanics during the April Fool's event this year, and we are working to integrate them into naval gameplay. Wonderful! One of the things that I think World of Warships does really well is that smaller ships are able to put down a layer of smoke, so basically the larger ships cannot see anything behind it. So it covers the smaller ship, and it may cover the larger ships on the smaller ship's team to hide behind and try and shoot the enemy. Now, the good thing about smoke screens is that it blocks both players' views. So if you want to say, you know, oh, it's an advantage or it's a disadvantage, well, it should be balanced out, depending on how good these smoke users are. I really hope this translates to ground forces. It seems like they're targeting smaller vessels to have smoke screens, which I think is really nice. And as I said before in my serious April Fool's video, I hope they target lighter tanks when it comes to being able to use smoke in ground forces. I'm not sure how that would screw with the realism, since we have a lot of tanks in games which are heavier, mainly medium tanks, which would be able to deploy smoke as well. But I'm wondering if, from a gameplay perspective, if they give light tanks just smoke and nobody else, I think that would be a better move, logically, instead of trying to focus wholly on the realism. But I think that's really nice to see. Smoke screens are a really good addition. Other features. We also plan to change the torpedo, aim, logic, and add leading indication. Wonderful stuff. They took it away from aircraft and now they're giving it to naval vessels. I'm completely fine with that. It's nice that it takes a lot of skill now in planes to drop torpedoes, but once again, I think this will be something where we'll have the lead indication and torpedo aim logic in arcade, and then in realistic and simulator it will definitely be a bit taken away. Like, there may be a line there showing you where it should go, but that'll be about it, whereas in arcade it'll be a much more sophisticated system, so I think that's completely fine. As for the visuals, we have added procedural destruction of the vessels. It is in the final testing stage at the moment. We also continuously improve the visuals of the craft, water, and environment. Wonderful stuff. That's what I love to see. One of the first things that I noticed when Ground Forces was introduced was the fact that if I hit the Panzer IV-H, which is the one with the spaced armor on the turret and the side skirts on the side, if I hit that with like a 122 HE and it didn't kill them, what it would do is it would blow off all of the add-on armor, and I thought that was so cool to see. And I hope, well, I'm not even sure if it's there or not, but I've never seen it. So I'm working from the point where I don't think it is there. But it would be nice to see, like, you know, blown off tracks and stuff like that. I just love that stuff. When a gun hits a ship, what I want to see is stuff on that ship being torn to tatters. Whether if you hit the enemy ship and you hit one of their guns on it, that gun should just obliterate into a million pieces, or maybe it leaves a massive hole in the ship, and maybe there's cracks in the ship, and you know, stuff like that. I think that would be so cool. But I understand there are limitations to how much you can do with procedural destruction, just because, you know, not everyone has crazy high NPCs, and we don't want FPSs to shit the bed. We already saw issues when Ground Forces was first added with FPS when stuff takes damage, and I still encounter issues with aircraft. Generally, I sit around on full 120, 140 FPS without recording. Once I take damage to something, it generally drops to about 60 to 80. So it seems like the damage model is really taking up a lot of power from my PC. And with a large naval vessel, I'm guessing this will just be amplified. So hopefully that is sorted out, because there is definitely an issue there. Besides general gameplay improvement, all these changes will let us add larger ships to the game. So there we go, that is basically the line that people were looking for. That was one of the main complaints that many people had, and I have my own queries about larger ships, as I said before, but that's what people want to see, and it seems like Gaijin are happy to provide it. It depends what they mean by larger ships, because right now we don't really have huge ships. Larger ships could mean light cruisers, larger ships could mean destroyers, they could also mean main battleships, they could also mean carriers. So it's all up in the air, but just saying that they're going to add larger ships, you know, that's a positive for the community. That was something that it seemed like everybody wanted to see, so nice job. And now some numbers. What has already been done and what you will be able to see in the nearest future. Okay. Oh, here we go. That leads on to the next bit. At the moment, we have the following things either ready or in development. Wonderful to hear. I like seeing, you know, pull back the curtain a little bit more. I love it when Gaijin does devlogs and stuff like that. So let's see. Over 70 vessels of various classes from different nations are completely ready, and around 20 more craft are currently in development. Holy crap, that's a lot. 10 locations, both the one we have already shown and one's in development, gun stabilization systems, traversing torpedo tubes, procedural destruction of vessels, new damage model mechanics, and torpedo gyro correction. So, all very realistic changes. I'm very happy about that. I'm just going to check on the Thunderskill how many tanks and how many planes we actually have in the game. Now, this is obviously limited to how many. You know, if somebody doesn't use a plane, or nobody uses a plane, then generally it's not going to show up on Thunderskill, but this is a rough estimate. So aircraft on Thunderskill right now, there are 507 aircraft, which is across all nations, and ground forces 323 tanks. And you've got to remember, when ground forces was added, we only had Germany and the USSR. Did we have 70 vehicles, 90 vehicles, if you add the 20 which are currently in development? I'm not sure we did. We may have had less than that. Once the US rolled around, we probably had more than 70, but still, 70 seems like a big number, and I just see these craft taking a hell of a lot more time to make than a tank or a aircraft. I mean, maybe in aircraft you have to test it a little bit more because you have the 3D plane you have to work on, but since they're working with, you know, as I said before, like more water mechanics and stuff like that, maybe we're going to see much more 3D planing with these ships instead of the 2D which we see with tanks. So 70 vessels is great, and around 20 more currently in development. Now, they don't say what these ships are. We know certain ships that are in the game, they're obviously smaller vessels, but I wonder if those 20 more craft are anything to do with these larger ships people are talking about, or even some of the over 70 vessels. Any of them larger ships, or are we looking at like tier 1 and tier 2 PT boats? We don't know. Or tier 1 and tier 2 flagships. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what they mean. 10 locations is huge. There is no way we had 10 maps when we started War Thunder ground forces. I can think of about 4. You know, Ash River, Karelia, Mozdok wasn't a map that we got given at the start. I'd have to go through them, but I can't, there's no way that we would have 10 locations ready. I mean, a lot of the locations will be just plucked off existing maps, and from what I've seen from the maps, they're generally just a set of island with water parading around them. Set of islands, sorry, with water parading around them, so they can't be too hard to make, but it's still nice to see that they have a lot of locations. Gun stabilization, wonderful. Traversing torpedo tubes, wonderful. Procedural destruction of vessels, absolutely grand, as long as it doesn't tank FPS. New damage model mechanics, same thing as the FPS issue, but still looks like a very good change. And torpedo gyro correction. That's going to be very interesting to see how that works and how much you can abuse it. Will we be able to drift torpedoes? That is the question that is on my mind. But overall, it seems like a very positive change for naval forces. A lot of things answered that much of the community was talking about. For me personally, you know, there's not really a lot they talked about. They talked a little bit about, you know, the interaction between ships and aircraft. They haven't really talked about the RNG factor when it comes to team composition, apart from the little bit at the start. But once we start seeing these larger ships, I'm pretty sure they're going to address some of the issues that I brought up. And if they don't, I'll try and talk to somebody at Gaijin, see if I can get my questions Q&A'd. We'll have to see. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you haven't seen the queries about large naval vessels video, as I said, there will be a link in the description for it, and a link for this post as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.